Hello, everyone. We're going to be starting at 1 p.m. I just want to let everyone know that we will be in listen-only mode. And at the end of today's presentation, we will have the opportunity to type in our questions, comments, or concerns on the right-hand side. In addition, on the right-hand side, you will see there's a section for handouts, and that is where you'll find the copy of today's PowerPoint presentation and a handout that Matt had put together for the presentation and for today. And so we will begin at 1, but again, this is going to be in listen-only mode. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Care Connection, the free live conference the second Thursday of each month. Today, we have a very special guest speaker. His name is Matt Gurrell, and his topic today is when to put the brakes on your loved one's driving. Mr. Gurrell has, after retiring from a very successful 24-year career with the Ohio State Highway Patrol, he founded Keeping Us Safe, a national organization with a mission to help safeguard older drivers. He has developed programs that provide senior drivers and their families with direction in helping to ensure a loved one's smooth transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat before tragedy has the opportunity to strike. And today, Matt will be presenting on driving safety. Please, Matt, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Heather. Thank you for having me today. My name, as you said, is Matt Gurrell. I am the founder of Keeping Us Safe. We are a national organization serving older drivers and their families, and, as I like to say, professionals that might find themselves in that mix somehow. I personally am located geographically here in Cleveland, Ohio, but again, we serve all of the United States. And today I'm hoping to talk briefly about older drivers with diminished driving skills and how to generate conversation with them about those issues. So thank you again, Heather, for having me. First, the name of the company, again, is Keeping Us Safe. And just by way of introduction, I just want to explain what we do and why we do what we do. The purpose part of Keeping Us Safe, the reason it was founded to begin with, is I was an Ohio State trooper, and I retired as an administrator from the Ohio State Highway Patrol. And I saw through my career that there was a significant void, so to speak, in how we as a society, not only here in Ohio, but across the country, handle the issue of older drivers with diminished driving skills. It seemed to me to be the hot potato issue. No one profession wanted that the responsibility of having that conversation with the older driver land in their lap, so to speak. As you well know, courts, for example, their hands are somewhat tied because they're governed by sentencing guidelines. So they have to treat an 85-year-old driver that ran a stop sign and injured somebody just like they do the 25-year-old driver. They can impose no special sanctions against that person just because of their age. Physicians, as I'm sure some of you are aware, are sometimes reluctant to have the driving conversation with a patient. There are all sorts of reasons for that. We could have our own webinar about that. Probably, Heather, if we surveyed everybody on the webinar today, there would be some general consensus that probably there should be some type of retesting for older drivers at some particular age. And exactly what all of that is, we could discuss for eons to come. But if that's true, if the majority of the population thinks there should be something in place, then why isn't there? There are actually only about half a dozen states that have any type of retesting for older drivers at a particular age. And again, there are all sorts of reasons that our government doesn't want to do that. And we don't have time for that today. And of course, families, they simply have no place to turn as they become worried about mom or dad's driving. We get letters and phone calls here at the Keeping Us Safe office saying, look, I've done everything I can think of to do. I'm scared to death. My mom's driving is horrendous. She's going to hurt herself or hurt someone else, but I can't get anyone to talk to her. I can't get anyone to take her keys, so to speak. So I knew that the families were in some type of stress over this issue as well. So that's the purpose part. We try to fill that void. We help families work through this delicate and sensitive issue of mom or dad's diminished driving skills. The purpose part the passion part, of founding Keeping Us Safe was that for me as a state trooper, I've had to deliver many, many, many death notifications. And you know what that means, knocking on a family's door at 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. and explaining basically to whoever answers the door that your loved one was just killed in a car accident. And I always thought, even as a young trooper, as I call it the long journey back to my patrol car from the front porch, I always thought that someday I would like to be able to do something that's more proactive to keep these crashes from happening in the first place. As you know, law enforcement is a lot of reactive work. You see someone run a stop sign, you stop them and kindly ask them not to do that again. You see someone rob a bank, you stop them and kindly ask them not to do that again for the next 18 to 24 years. But so much of it was reactive. So this keeping us safe, what we do is meant to be a proactive approach to the issue of older drivers with diminished driving skills so that we can stop them and help them make a smooth transition into a driving retirement before one of these tragedies has to occur. We are actually, I'd like to consider us as an organization an advocate for older drivers. We have programs, we have public presentations for older drivers themselves. They're not driver refresher program. It's an education program, and more than that, it's a philosophy kind of, where we try to instill in the older driver that, look, you might be an older driver, but as long as you stay aware of any diminishing driving skills and make appropriate adjustments in your driving behavior, you can actually extend your safe driving career. You can continue driving for longer. So at Keeping Us Safe, as I mentioned, we have no programs for younger drivers. There are people that do that. And our older drivers are not our target. We're on their side. Again, we want to help them remain safe drivers for longer. But if and when the day comes where it's time for them to step away from driving, then we like to help them with that process as well. As we all know, driving can become even more challenging than it is anyhow when we have some type of mild cognitive impairment, a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's disease, some type of decline in executive functioning, declines in memory. You've heard family members say, or you've heard older drivers say this themselves, that, Mom, why don't you stop driving on unfamiliar roads? Stay on the routes you're familiar with. Just go to the places that you're most comfortable driving to. Sure. Is that a good tip to help extend someone's safe driving career? Sure. We've heard this: drive shorter distances. Quit taking the long trips to Cleveland, Ohio to see your brother. If you want to go there, we'll drive you. As a family, one of us kids will take you to Cleveland to see him. Drive on less traveled roads. Drive during the daytime hours only. Mom, why don't you avoid rush hour traffic? Don't go out at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and don't be on the road at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. And of course, avoid bad weather driving. I mentioned those. We've all heard those tips before, and I mentioned them. But what I want to say about them is they are very good tips, and they can help an older driver extend their safe driving career. But they're not going to keep them from having a traffic crash forever. They're not good for life, so to speak. Certainly, they will hopefully reduce the likelihood of a future traffic crash, but they're not going to prevent it. And someday that individual, even though we've imposed these safety tips, they may still outlive their safe driving career. The federal government, who knows everything, says that on average, we outlive our safe driving years by 7 to 10 years. So with that being the truth, we can, all of us, every one of us on this webinar, myself included, can expect that I will live long enough that there will come a day when I have to step away from driving. I want to offer 4 tips on having this conversation with a loved one or with a patient or with a client that I think you'll find helpful. 1, there has to be a unified family approach as you talk to mom or talk to dad about retiring from driving. We all know from our professional situations and in our own personal lives that if 2 siblings are telling dad, I think you're a great driver, and the other two siblings are arguing that dad should never drive again, there's going to be trouble within the family. It's going to divide the family. And this driving issue can do that. Again, we get calls here all the time at Keeping Us Safe saying, my siblings and I don't even speak anymore because we're at war over mom's driving. So again, before approaching mom or dad about stepping away from driving, there needs to be a unified family approach. Whether you all agree or not is not really relevant. What is relevant is that your loved one perceives that you all agree. You need to be singing from the same sheet of music as you have these difficult conversations. Second tip, the family or someone has a duty to find acceptable transportation alternatives. In other words, a plan B. It's one thing to go and talk to a person about retiring from driving because their skills are slipping, but you need to have the other part of it is you need to have a plan in place so that they maintain their independence. Dr. Waldinger, a PhD from Harvard Medical School, recently did a study on loneliness. And near the very top of the introduction to his study, he writes, loneliness kills. It's as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. And we need to remember that. Don't just take away this person's mode of transportation without filling it with something. The family or the professional needs to make wise use of all available resources. The best way to do that is to talk to someone. Ask them what resources are available in this particular community. Do your Google research. Talk to professionals at the Area Agency on Aging or the Alzheimer's Foundation of America. The local senior center, talk to people that know, talk to people that are in these circles to find out what types of resources are available for my mom or for my client if they do step away from driving. And lastly, in this process, in these discussions, there has to be ownership and active participation by the older driver, his or herself. Involve them in this. Don't just come to the house, go to mom's house and impose some sentence on her. Don't show up with a tow truck to take her car away. Involve her in this process. I want to offer as well some tips on having the talk, the dreaded talk, the driving conversation. It is critically important that the family removes, or the professional, all of their emotions, their opinions, and speculation, and reduce everything to facts. Don't just tell your loved one that, Mom, you're a horrible driver. That's not a fact. That's an opinion. Provide them with facts. I once did one of the services we offer. In fact, the primary service that we offer is a 3-hour one-on-one session with one of our representatives and the older driver. It takes place at their home. We come in, sit down, meet with them for a 3-hour block of time, go through all sorts of tabletop, pen and paper type cognitive exercises. Assuming it's safe to do so, we'll actually go out and go for a ride with them. And then at the end, we tell them what we think about their driving. Long story short, I was doing one of these sessions once in a very, very wealthy suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, and we were out doing our driving exercise. And this person's driving was horrible. I've done over 300 of these sessions myself, and this is the only time I've ever asked him to pull over so we could switch drivers and me drive us back home because I feared for our lives. So we did that. And now he's confused. He was confused to begin with, and he's more confused now. And he asked me, why are you driving? And I told him, I said, your driving's going to kill us. I don't want that to happen. And I went on and explained to him, I said, Mr. Smith, you do this wrong. You did that wrong. You tried to make a left-hand turn from the far right lane of a very busy Cleveland, Ohio intersection. Death was imminent. And there was a long silence from him. And then he said, if all of that is true, well, actually, he said, if half of that is true, then I shouldn't be driving. He said, nobody ever told me those things. My wife and my adult son are always on me that my driving is horrible, but they never gave specifics. They never told me exactly why they thought that. And that's why it's so important for us to remember to talk only in terms of factual information, things you know, not hearsay, not opinion, emotions, or speculation. Provide them with the facts. What not to do. I kind of like this image. Don't launch a hand grenade into their house saying you need to give up driving. Boom. Because that's exactly how that's going to turn out. In the back of our workbook, we have a workbook, and it's one of the resources listed on the handout that Heather mentioned that should be available to you. But in the back of the workbook, we have an appendix, and in there contains what we call a granddaughter's essay. And it's about an adult granddaughter. Her and her cousin went to visit the grandfather and tell him or suggest to him that, look, we're worried about your driving. We're not sure you should continue driving. And so they went there together to have this talk with him. Well, they didn't plan their conversation. And by coincidence, grandfather happened to be out in the front yard doing some lawn work when they pulled in. And she gets out, and she, of course, has this well-prepared in her mind, she didn't share it with anyone, way that she was going to approach Grandpa about his driving, just share with him that they had some concerns. The cousin that went with her had a different plan. He wanted to get done here and get back home. So they get out of the car together, and he says to Grandpa, Grandpa, we're here to take your car and your keys from you. You shouldn't be driving any longer. And the adult granddaughter, says, you could see the life drain from my grandfather's face. And 2 months later, he dies unexpectedly. She swears it's because of how this driving issue was handled with him. So don't do that. Make it a discussion, make it a process. And again, cite the facts. Here are some other tips. Be respectful. We all know that. I'm reminded of a quote from President Kennedy. It was back during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he said, we don't want to push Khrushchev into a precipitous action. I don't want to put him into a corner from which he cannot escape. And kind of the same thing is true here. The older driver, they oftentimes have been driving for 60, 70 years sometimes. And truly, even though they all say it, for some of them it's true, they've never had an accident. They've never been cited by the police, nothing. Their driving career has been stellar, has been near perfect. And now all of a sudden, here's somebody half their age explaining to them that they shouldn't be driving any longer. And we need to be respectful. Remember, again, the granddaughter's story that I just told you. She says that lack of respect is what led to her grandfather's death. Cite specific examples with specifics in italics. We already talked about that. Be empathetic. Understand the difficulty of the transition. For some of these folks, they're getting up in years sometimes, and they've maybe lost a lot in their lives already. Maybe a spouse has passed away. Maybe they've been forced to downsize. So the farm that they lived on for the past 80 years has now been gone to auction. And they've been put into an assisted or independent living type facility. They're going through a tough time. They're looking for validation. The last thing they need is somebody telling them that they shouldn't be driving. So we need to be empathetic. I know for me, I'm a retired Ohio State trooper. I love to drive. Some people like to eat, some people like to drink, some people like to smoke. Matt likes to drive. And I already dread the day that's understanding that someday I may not be able to do that any longer. It's a huge part of my life. And we need to understand that that probably is the case with the person that we're talking to. help find alternatives. We've already talked about this plan B notion. Find strength in numbers. Here's what we mean by that. It should never be one person that assumes the burden or bears the burden of having to have this difficult conversation with this person. It needs to be a holistic approach. Everybody needs to be involved. Doctors, ask the family doctor, can you please talk to my dad about driving? Or for those of you that are professionals, suggest here that the family brings the issue up with their doctor. Same with nurses, clergy members. Oftentimes, these adults are very, very involved in their church, in their religion, whatever that happens to be. The family attorney, social workers or geriatric counselors that may be involved, friends, neighbors, and other family members. I have neighbors on here. Do you remember the old show? It wasn't Tool Time Tim, but it had Tim the Tool Man in it. Probably everybody on this webinar can think of the name of it but me, but you know the show I'm talking about. Well, remember how Tim had so much respect for his neighbor? Was it Higgins or Wiggins? And all you'd ever see of the neighbor is the top of his hat. You remember that? They stood at the fence and they talked and they shared information. But do you remember how much respect Tim had for his neighbor? I don't think that they were necessarily best friends. I don't remember ever seeing them do anything together socially. But Tim went to his neighbor for advice, and he listened to him. And a lot of times that's true still to this day. So, you know, any one of these may not be the answer to the problem, but all of them put together help ease that burden of suggesting to this individual that they step away from driving. And of course, other family members, we already talked about how important it is that the family be on the same sheet of music. We kind of talked about this briefly. Back to the issue of having the conversation. Don't give blanket statements. I have 2 adult boys. In X amount of years, when they show up to tell me they think I shouldn't be driving any longer, and all they have to offer is, we think you're really a bad driver, all I'm going to do is kick them in the shins. They need to provide me with facts, and we owe that to the older adult. Remember, they probably have been driving for 50, 60, 70 years, some of them, and never had an accident. They're owed an explanation. What do you mean you think I shouldn't be driving any longer? Go provide them with that information. Also, on the handout that you, I believe you have available to you, there's a link there to our family driving agreement. It's just another tool. It's not the solve-all. It reads here, this informal agreement, and it's just meant to be stayed within the family, between the older driver and their family, doesn't restrict driving at the moment of signing, but designates a person the senior trust to take necessary steps to ensure safe driving in the future. This form, utilization of this form, allows the senior driver to still maintain their dignity, which again is so important. I want to say again, it is the very name of our program, Beyond Driving with Dignity. It empowers the older driver to be involved in any decisions related to driving restrictions or future driving cessation. And again, it's a free download. It is not appropriate in every single family. I understand that, but in a lot of families have found this driving agreement. And it's just one page, very helpful. And all it is, when you look at it, is a single piece of paper, and basically it's from the older driver, and it says, my driving is okay today. If it's ever not okay, and it's no longer safe for me to continue driving, I will trust, and they can fill in the name, so-and-so. When that person comes and tells me I shouldn't be driving, I'm going to listen to them. It can be a spouse. It can be a child. It can be a sibling. It can be the neighbor, Tim, the tool man's neighbor. It can be someone from the church or synagogue. It can be anybody that the older driver will agree that I will listen to this person when they tell me I shouldn't be driving any longer. It's a nice tool. And as a side note, the New York Times wrote an article about our family driving agreement. So just consider taking a look at it and see if it's something that you can use. If we approach our elders with a transportation solution rather than a transportation restriction, it will be a big help in this difficult life transition. And that all goes back to that plan B that we talked about moments ago. You have to have an alternative plan in place so this person doesn't feel like they're sentenced to the rest of their lives under house arrest. Nobody wants that. There are other ways to get this individual to the places they want to get to. Which brings me to my next point. At Keeping Us Safe, we like to say, at most, a retirement from driving might mean a loss of convenience, for sure, but it should never mean a loss of independence. And it's incumbent upon us as family and professionals to help make sure that this person does not lose their independence. I go and do talks to older adults, and I like to ask them this question. Who in here has never driven? And oftentimes, depending on the size of the group, there will be a couple, 3 or 4 people, typically ladies that have never driven in their lives, older ladies. And I know for me personally, neither one of my grandmothers ever drove a car. So I don't think it's that uncommon, or I don't think it was that uncommon back in that day. But anyhow, I ask that question. I always get a hand shoot up into the air. So I pick one person at random and I say, ma'am, you've never driven a car. You've never had a driver's license. Do you feel that you've missed out on social opportunities because of that? And every single time they respond the same way. No, I didn't miss a thing. Which is kind of proof in the pudding that this is true. We don't have to drive to maintain our independence. We think we have to drive. And I know that's easier said than done. But now today with technology, what it is, Uber and Lyft, and I'm not pro or anti Uber or Lyft, but all of the resources we have available to us, the community resources available sporadically throughout the country, and so many other things too. We do not have to lose our independence just because we made the right decision to give up driving. The person should not be penalized for making that decision. I did a talk, I mentioned I do talks with older drivers too, and I did one here in Ohio, and it was a large group. There were 60 or 70 older adults in this room. And off to my left was someone similar to this lady that we see here. And she had this score, and this was a perfect replica of her score. And she was sitting off to my left. Off to the right was another lady who had this disposition, this sunny, smiley disposition. And just after we got going into the presentation, the lady on the left spouts out that if my kids ever come to take my car or my keys or my license, she said, I'll just die. And she meant that from the deepest part of her heart. That was a promise. It wasn't a comment. It was a promise. She was telling everybody in that room what will happen if somebody tries to take her keys from her. So we went on through the presentation, and it was a 1-hour talk. And near the end, this lady on the right, completely unrelated now to what the lady on the left had said, but she says, if I ever have to give up driving, it's not going to be a big deal to me, she said, because I'll still figure out how to get to the places I want to get to. And I asked myself, at first that didn't mean a whole lot to me, but I asked myself driving home, I got to thinking, what would happen if both of them had to give up driving effective tomorrow? What would happen to the lady on the left? We already know what would happen. She promised us what would happen. And what would happen with the lady on the right? We already know what would happen with her. She told us what would happen. And I'm reminded of a quote by Henry Ford. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're probably right. And I think that's true. Number one, for the older driver, as in this case that I just described, I'm guessing she would maintain her independence. I'm guessing she wouldn't miss a beat socially. But I think it's also true for the family. If you think, or for the professional, if you think to yourself, I will put a plan in place to help this person maintain their independence, you probably are right. And if you think to yourself, oh my goodness, this is going to be an impossible feat, too many demands, too much this, too much that, too much drama for me, it's not going to work, but I'll try, then it's probably not going to work. And I think there's a whole lot in that self-fulfilling prophecy. I did one of these self-assessment sessions once with an older lady, 86 years old, and her name was Evelyn. And Evelyn didn't want to go through this session, as you can imagine. And when kind of funny, when we were introduced to each other by her daughter, adult daughter, Evelyn wouldn't even shake my hand. She kind of squirmed back a little bit, and she said, this is exactly what she said. She said, I don't like you. You're here to take my keys in my car. And she meant that. But anyhow, we got over that. We went through the 3-hour session together. And now at the end of the session, Evelyn is crying. It's just her and I at this conference room table, and she's sitting across from me, and she's crying, and she says, I know I shouldn't be driving anymore, but this is the toughest thing I've ever had to deal with since the passing of my husband. And I felt bad for her, as hopefully any of us would. And we tried to talk our way through that. And that kind of ended our session. But here's the neat thing. Evelyn calls me 2 months later, still crying. And I knew who she was because she kind of had a place in my heart. But so I was happy to hear from her, although I was disappointed that she was crying. And she says, I have to tell you, I am busier now than I ever have been in my adult life. She said, once my friends and my neighbors, family realize that I don't drive anymore, they've come from everywhere to help me maintain my independence, to involve me in things. And here's what she went on to say, and I think it was a very powerful statement and a good reminder to all of us. She says, as it turned out, giving up driving turned out to be the absolute best thing that could have happened to me right now in my life. So she was crying happy tears, of course, when she called me back this time. Which again, I think is a very good reminder for all of us that giving up driving does not have to mean a loss of independence. We need to get rid of that mindset. That is it, everyone. I want to, one last thing, if I can offer this, is, as you're having these discussions, be confident. Know that you're doing the right thing. I'm reminded by another saying, amateurs built the Ark, professionals built the Titanic. So don't underestimate your abilities to connect with this person and to show them that stepping away from driving right now is probably a good idea.
Thank you, Matt. That was great. I certainly learned new things today. And I want to let everyone know that we now are going to be taking questions or comments that we could be reading. I will be reading them to Matt, and Matt will be answering. So if anyone has any questions, now's your time to type them in. I have one question.
Yes.
What about if someone, and you might know this or you might not know this, if someone is on medical record diagnosed with Alzheimer's and they get into an accident, but the doctor tells them they shouldn't be on the road, what happens in that situation? Would the person with Alzheimer's get in trouble? Would the family get in trouble? Or is that a very much a legal question?
No, it's not a lot of legal jumbo, but the question raises many other questions. Just with a simple diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia, one does not necessarily have to give up driving. Mild cognitive impairment, for example, is the early onset of one of those diseases. And a person with mild cognitive impairment can probably still continue driving safely, as they can with an early diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. The other thing is, if the doctor has suggested to the person that they stop driving, typically, Now, remember, there's 50 different states that we're dealing with, but most often there's a procedure in place within that state's Bureau of Motor Vehicles or Department of Motor Vehicles where a doctor can report that this person should not be driving, and then eventually their driver's license is subject to being canceled. So
right.
it kind of depends on where you're at, and it kind of depends on where the individual is with their diagnoses of dementia or Alzheimer's.
Thank you. I have a comment from Jenny Womack. Sounds like a great program, and our team has benefited from many of these same strategies. But I was surprised that you did not mention occupational therapists, who I believe are the largest professional group of people certified to do medical functional driving evaluations. Do you ever work with them?
Jenny, you're exactly right. Occupational therapists are exactly what you described. They are clinical driving assessors. This program is not that. And I don't want to confuse the two. We are not driving assessors. We come in, facilitate a self-assessment program for the older driver and still allow them and their family and the physician, who, by the way, half of our referrals now come from doctors themselves. The decision is still up to those individuals to make. Our program is designed to keep this within the family unit so that it does not escalate and outside professional resources are not necessarily needed. Now, when we talked earlier about making wise use of all available resources, not oftentimes, but it's not uncommon for us to refer the family now onto an occupational or physical therapist that is a clinical driving assessor. But again, that's not what this program is.
Thank you. Myra has a question. Is there a program like this in other states, such as Florida?
Myra, thanks for asking the question. I don't know if there are similar programs. I do know that we have representatives in the state of Florida. We have about 70 of them across the United States, so that's not a lot. There are 50 states, so that's just over one per state, and a lot of states don't have anyone. I think we're in about 20 or 21 states right now, but Florida is one of them. And by the way, if anyone's interested in becoming certified in this program, there's more information available on our website on how to do that.
Thank you, Matt. I have a question from Risa Rubin. Are there driving services available in local communities that will take seniors to specific locations? If yes, how much is it per trip, if you know?
Well, I don't know the answer to that because every community's got their own programs in place, if any, by the way, I should add. But a great way to check for you and for anybody is to call your local community resources. Call the area agency on aging or whatever you happen to call it in your community, or the senior center, and see if they can at least get you started. A lot of communities have a 211 service that is an information referral type service. And they might be able to help you. And then now, like I mentioned, there's things like Uber and Lyft. It used to be, until just a year and a half ago, that to use Uber, you had to have two things. You had to have a smartphone and you had to have the Uber app. Well, for a lot of older adults, they don't have, nor do they want to get a smartphone. That's my father. He has no, and quite frankly, he has no business with a smartphone. But now they realized, from a business perspective, the folks like Uber realized we're missing out on a huge segment of our population because we're not allowing older drivers to use this service because they don't have the app. So they've developed a platform. It's called GoGo Grandparent. It's gogograndparent.com. That allows an older driver to use to call for an Uber ride without the app. So they can go to their phone, their home phone, dial this GoGo Grandparent number, and it works very similar to Uber. It's just an intermediary type thing that again serves as an interface between the older driver and Uber. And they can have Uber driver show up within 10 minutes. I think that's something, again, I'm not pushing that. I have nothing in that whatsoever, but I encourage you to go to the gogograndparent.com website. They've got a real nice tutorial right on their homepage that kind of shows you how simplistic the program is. What's nice, too, about it is they will send you, or whoever's on this list, they will send those people notifications. Look, I just picked up your mother from the grocery store and we're taking her home. So you'll get those notifications. You'll know when mom leaves and when mom arrives back home safely. So I think it's an excellent service.
That is a great service. Thank you for sharing that resource. Laura Matos, she wants to tell you that this was a great presentation. You gave a lot of light on how to approach the issues with my patients. Thanks a million. So she really appreciated today's presentation.
Thank you, Laura.
What about if I have another question from Sarah. She wants to know if how to remove a car. If you try to no avail to get the person to stop driving, what are some strategies to physically remove the car?
You know, to be honest with you, I've said before, if this gets to that point, then we've done something wrong along the way. And I'm not blaming the question asker, suggesting that she's done something wrong, but somehow we failed that person if it comes to showing up at the house with a tow truck and dragging the car out of the driveway. But there are things, especially if a person is suffering from some cognitive issues, you know, there are some other tools that would work. I've heard of families either asking the doctor to write a prescription or even making a homemade type prescription that just says no driving on it and showing that to the older adults saying, look, remember, you're not supposed to be driving. And sometimes that works in some scenarios. And I'm not encouraging people to go out and forge prescriptions. That's not what this is about. Other things. You know, I've heard of people, and again, I hate to talk about these things, but grinding down the key or replacing the key with another key that won't start the car. You know, there are kill switches that can be put in cars, and then ultimately towing the car. I also, one thing you can consider in that case is going to the local police department and telling them that, look, I just want to share some information with you. This person should not be driving. We've tried everything we can to get him to walk away from driving. We're just scared to death that he's going to hurt someone. And the police can't take action based directly on your comments, and we wouldn't expect them to, but it will put them on notice that if you see this person out driving and they commit some minor traffic offense, please look into it deeper, and hopefully you'll see for yourselves that they shouldn't be driving. And then there's action that the police can take from that point on.
Thank you. I have another question from Lauren. She wants to know if your person is driving and goes missing, what is the first step that someone should do if their person is missing and we know that they took the car?
Call the police. On that list of on that handout that you have available to you, there's one page dedicated to our podcast. We have a Beyond Driving with Dignity podcast show. And I think it was our most recent guest, or second most recent guest, we had come on and talk about silver alert systems and exactly how they work. And he stressed the importance. First of all, I want to say that podcast is available to you at no charge, obviously. But he stresses the importance of notifying your local authorities first. Now, when that happens, if the person is missing in a vehicle, the silver alert system can actually become involved. Unbeknownst to me, the silver alert systems, and they're called different things in different states. But generally speaking, everybody knows what I'm talking about. And I mean that as an interchangeable term. But the silver alert system will only activate if the individual is in a car. If they're missing, if they just walked out the back door and they've wandered off into the woods somewhere, they won't be able to reap the benefits of the silver alert system. So if they're in a car, like what Lauren described, then by all means, steps can be taken almost immediately to help find this individual. And there's all sorts of local resources typically available to help do that. But nothing can happen until you do the triggering event of calling the local authorities.
Thank you. I have a question from Jenny. Curious about your assessment process. You mentioned it is a self-assessment by the older driver and it has an on-road component. Do you use a specific checklist for driving performance that is publicly available, or does it belong to your organization? Thank you.
Jenny, it's an excellent question. We do not use a specific checklist for that particular exercise. What we are looking for is, like I mentioned earlier, this is meant to be not a clinical approach to the driving issue, but a common sense approach. So certainly our facilitators have some key things that they're looking for, but we look deeper than that even. Yes, it's one thing that the person uses their turn signals and they don't drive over the speed limit and they know the shape of and color of a stop sign. Those are all important things. But more than that, too, we're looking for their ability to be good defensive drivers. We're looking for the ability for them to solve problems as they drive, such as merging onto an interstate, how they handle an approaching emergency vehicle. And then we're looking, too, at even a deeper level of how well they're able to plan their trip. And we've got some little scenarios that we mix into that for them, but how able they are to lay out the best route to go to these particular destinations, and again, how they're going to solve problems. So it's way more than just the physical act of driving. That's one thing. And a lot of times with cognitive decline, they may perform well in those duties. I've met with people that should never drive so far as out to get the mail at the end of the day, that have done well on the driving exercise, but they perform very poorly on the other cognitive exercises. The checklist that we do have available, Jenny, is in our workbook. And it's titled Beyond Driving with Dignity, the workbook for older drivers and their families. And that is, again, one of the links that Heather referred to on this handout.
And thank you. We have another question from Rosemary. Are there any type of vehicles that are safer for drivers that have warnings like driving out of lane?
Rosemary, I want to, those new vehicle safety technologies, and let me say too that back to the whole podcast page of the handouts you've got, we interviewed a Texas A&M researcher who is very deep into this whole notion of autonomous vehicles, and we talked during that interview about all sorts of things. One is the safety features that you're asking about, but two, we talked about the issue of artificial intelligence and what role that plays in new vehicle development and design and the eventual day of autonomous vehicles. But he and I both agreed that we can equip these new cars with all the safety features imaginable. But still, somebody has to be able to manage them. And that's where the cognitive piece comes in. And I'll give you a tiny example. I did one of these self-assessments once with an older gentleman, and we were driving down the road. It was a busy, kind of like in your typical shopping mall area. It was 2 lanes going this way, 2 lanes coming the other way, and a middle turn lane. And we're driving in the left lane. That part was okay, of our traffic going that direction, but this person had his left turn signal on, and we drove for a couple miles like that. And finally, just out of the blue, he says to me, after a couple of miles, he says, "Is that your cell phone?" I said, "Is what my cell phone?" He said, "That clicking." I said, "No, sir." I said, "That's your," get rid of this warning. I said, "That's your turn signal." I said, "We've been driving for a couple, 3 miles with your left turn signal on." And he looks down, he's still driving. He looks down, sees that indeed he has his left turn signal on. So here's the scary part though. He turns it off and turns it up into the right turn signal position. So now we're driving down the road with our right turn signal on, still in the left lane, and he's just happier in the peach because he's found the problem. He found the ticking. Now he doesn't recognize that the ticking is still there. No references anymore to my phone, no references to the blinking light and the dash that shows our turn signal on. My whole point is somebody has to be able to manage those inputs. And this gentleman, in this case, because of cognitive decline, was not able to do that. So these lane departure warning systems, they are excellent supplements to a normal, cognitively normal driver. They're excellent tools. They should never be used to replace the driver's natural abilities. It was Chelsea Sullenberger. You remember he landed the U.S. Air Flight 1529 in the Hudson River and saved all those lives several years ago. but before his movie came out, he wrote a couple of books. And in one of them, I think it's called Highest Duty or Highest Honor. But in that particular book, he talked about how you almost have to purposely set out to crash one of these Boeing jets. He said they've got so many redundant systems, so many safety features in them, that to crash one, you almost have to purposely go in and defeat half of these systems. But here's what he said. As good as these systems are, it still does not diminish the important role the pilot plays. Somebody still has to be here to interpret those signals and those warnings and to take appropriate corrective action when they appear. And I think that's kind of, these new safety features, again, I can't say enough positive things about them. I wish I had more on my car, but they're not going to be able to replace a cognitive driver sitting in the driver's seat. During this interview with the Texas A&M researcher, which again is available to you, he talks about how the next step for us, he thinks, is kind of going to be senior packages, where you can go and buy a new car and pay extra for the senior package. Which, to this day, I think is that's not in place. There is no such thing. They'd probably laugh you out of the dealership if you asked for that. But he thinks that is coming in the very near future. And these packages, again, are going to have more and more safety features built into them. I hope that answered your question, Rosemary.
That was helpful for me. I think it was helpful for Rosemary too. And she says, thank you. So Rosemary
Sure.
likes that response. Nina wants to know, or I think in PA, Pennsylvania, the Department of Transportation has hold on a second, a retesting program that could be triggered by the PCP, etc. Is this also available in other states?
Triggered by what?
I think in Pennsylvania, the Department of Transportation has a retesting program. I think she's trying to say to go back into the DMV that can be triggered by the PCP, the primary physician.
Oh.
Is this also available in other states?
Yes, to some extent. Again, all the states are different, and that's kind of one of the problems with this older driver issue across the country, is that there is no consistency in the laws and the rules and the procedures whatsoever. None. By coincidence, some states might do it the same way, but it is nothing more than that, a coincidence. Here in Ohio, for example, and you all are in different states, but here in Ohio, we only have to take a vision test every 4 years. You go in every 4 years, you pass the vision test, and you're a good, safe driver now for the next 4 years. In some states, Heather, that can be done by mail. In some states, the period of a driver's license is up to 10 years. So every state is different. But what I think is relatively consistent in most states is that there is a way for law enforcement and medical professionals to submit a request that this person be retested. And I think that's what she's referring to or referencing, is that can the doctor do that? And the answer is yes, typically in most states. Now, what a lot of people don't know is also in that same piece of policy, it lists organizations and persons that can submit a request for a reevaluation for an unsafe driver. And a lot of times that list includes family members. Now, the only thing is if you're going to report mom to the state of whatever and ask that she be retested, it can't be anonymous. It has to be authored. So, the state's going to rat you out, so to speak, when mom gets her letter. She's going to say that Nina says you're not a safe driver, and because of that, we want you to take the following steps. Now, they don't just automatically, of course, cancel a person's license just because they get the request to re-examine them. And they may not, even though it comes from a doctor or from a law enforcement officer, they may not automatically retest the person. It goes before and I think most states are consistent with this, what they call a medical review board that meets every other month or so. And then they take all of these requests for reexamination and they review them and they vote on them. yes, this person should be reevaluated. No, there's not enough information here. This person should not be reevaluated. And that's kind of how the process works, speaking in very general terms.
Thank you, Matt. That was a really great explanation. And we're gonna, is there any other questions? Because we do have a couple of moments left. I don't see any questions, any more questions. I know a lot of people had been typing in how helpful this was, and they're really thankful for today's presentation. And I want to give a heartfelt thanks to you, Matt, for volunteering your time and expertise today. I certainly learned new. Oh, wait, one more question from Rosemary. I do apologize. How would one share these tips with a class or group of seniors?
Rosemary, it's a good question. You know, that's kind of up to you, I guess, basically is what I'm trying to say, to develop a program. Or choice B is, and what I, of course, would like to see you do, is our Beyond Driving with Dignity professionals have received training and licensure in our 2 group presentations for the public. We offer CEU programs as well for professionals. Can't say that, but the 2 we have for the public, all of our Beyond Driving with Dignity professionals, the 70 of them I mentioned across the U.S., are trained and, again, licensed to present these. One is titled, the one I think you're referencing, is titled A Safe Drive Through the Aging Process. And that is a 1-hour presentation meant for older drivers. And again, I think I mentioned earlier, it's more of a philosophical approach to their driving future. We try to convey to them that it's still a good day for you. You still control your driving future. You might be a little bit older, but that's okay. And as long as you continue to make good decisions about your diminished driving skills and how they can affect your driving, and you make appropriate adjustments in your driving behavior, then you can actually extend your safe driving career. And again, it's meant to be a very powerful, and it's very well received by the senior adult population. And then the other one we have, Rosemary, is titled Adults with Aging Parent Drivers, and that one is meant, of course, for adults with aging parent drivers. And it too is a 1-hour presentation that kind of walks them through this process of how to have these discussions with mom or dad about their driving. And I encourage you to, you may not be anywhere near one of our Beyond Driving with Dignity professionals, but you also may be. And I'm sure any one of them would be more than happy to come and present on your behalf.
Thank you so much for that response. This is Lauren, another licensed social worker here at AFA. I've been sitting side by side with Heather, listening to this wonderful and educational presentation. I'm going to pick up another question if you have time. I know we're cutting into the end time, but we do have 2 more questions in our queue here. And we also have another thanks from Rosemary. Thank you, Rosemary, for your questions. So I have a question here from Chris. I'm afraid my husband, who has early onset dementia, may not be able to communicate effectively with a state trooper or police person if he gets stopped for a traffic violation. He may be viewed as disoriented. Are there rules, policies in place with law enforcement to be considerate or understanding of a person with a communication problem? Thank you, Chris.
And, again, this is state by state, and it's even worse than that, Chris, because it's organization within state by state. So everybody sets their own rules kind of on how law enforcement officers are educated. But I can tell you, for decades, we've been receiving training in how to work with people that might maybe have problems communicating for whatever reason. And the best thing for him to do, the simplest way, is to keep some type of card or something with him, maybe attached to his driver's license, that just says, look, I've got cognitive issues, or I'm not able to speak effectively, something like that he can show the police officers if and when he does need to do that. And
yeah, sorry, go on, Matt.
Well, and then I'm sure he's struggled with this issue somewhere in the past. Probably to one degree or another, he's had an issue communicating with someone, and he knows, and we all know that he can always has the option of writing things down to communicate that way.
Well, I'd be curious, if he's not able to communicate, his writing might be impacted as well. Maybe reaching out to an occupational therapist. They might have some ideas. I know that some people carry around please be patient cards, that someone's living with this disease, but he might not recognize to give someone that card. So this might be a deeper conversation to have also with an occupational therapist. I want to say on our end, we have trained and are continuing to train cadets in the police department about how to work and how to communicate with people living with this disease. I'm sorry, the Port Authority. I meant to say the Port Authority, the cadets through the Port Authority. And so that's something that we recognize that we want to educate community members and public servicemen and women on, because this is an important topic. So I have another question. Matt, you're popular today.
Great.
Do you have representatives from your entity in Durham, Chapel Hill, North Carolina?
We do not. And that's a good example of what I mentioned earlier. We have no one in North Carolina. So our 70 people are spread thin. They're in, I believe I said 19 or 20 states. And, the lion's share of them are here in Ohio. It's simply because I have more contact with people, and we're well known here, maybe not well known, but we're better known here in Ohio than we are some other states. But we're always looking for people. Part of our business model, and I'm kind of joking, but kind of serious when I say this, is we want to make this program available to every single family across the country. And the way we do that, of course, is by having folks in all of these areas like Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. I want to be like Starbucks, where we can say that we've got one on every corner pretty much. But we're not there yet, and we continue to grow. We continue to be more and more well received, not only by the families, but also by the professional community. We're doing business now with 3 different court systems that are sentencing, so to speak, people to our self-assessment program. Older drivers that have been cited out of a traffic crash, they're giving them the opportunity to either go through the criminal justice system as you always would, or plan B is you can go through this self-assessment program that Keeping Us Safe offers. So we're getting some court involvement now, and that's starting to pop up. Interest is starting to pop up more and more across the country. And also, I may or may not have mentioned earlier that about half of our referrals now come from physicians. Medical people that have tested the waters with this self-assessment program and found the results to be extremely helpful, beneficial in helping the family make the right decision about their loved one's driving future.
Thank you, Matt. So we're going to wrap things up now. It is 2 o'clock, and you certainly educated our listeners and myself today. So again, before I was going to say my heartfelt thanks, but we did have a couple more questions coming through. And so now I truly do want to thank you for your volunteering, your time and expertise. I also want to let everyone know that we will be back next month on May 10th from 1 to 2. And we're going to have Carrie Carpenter, who will be our guest speaker. And the topic will be how to be radically pro-aging and dementia positive. So I want to encourage everyone to come back next month for next month's Care Connection webinar. I want to also thank everyone for taking out their time today to listening to today's webinar and learning. And I appreciate everyone who asked such great questions. And I want to say to everyone, have a wonderful rest of the afternoon. And thank you, everyone. Thank you.